The music was so loud it made the chandeliers shake. Laughter and champagne bubbles filled the air, the ballroom shimmering under golden lights. Guests in tuxedos and silk gowns leaned across polished tables, whispering stories, toasting the newlyweds. It was supposed to be the happiest night of my daughter's life. And yet, I stood at the edge of the room, heart pounding, knowing I didn't belong. "Sir, you need to leave." The voice snapped me back. A broad-shouldered man in a black suit, clearly one of the hotel's security staff, had appeared at my side. His jaw was tense, his earpiece flashing. For a moment, I thought he had mistaken me for a stranger. But then I saw him glance across the room, straight toward the man standing next to my daughter. Ethan Carter, the fiancé. He was tall, handsome, with that slick smile he wore like armor. He had his arm wrapped proudly around Emily, my only daughter, now his wife of less than an hour. And when our eyes met, I swear he smirked. He had sent them. He wanted me gone. My throat tightened. I had raised Emily alone after her mother died. I was the one who packed her lunches, taught her how to ride a bike, stayed up late when she cried over broken hearts. I thought tonight I'd finally be able to walk her down the aisle, hand her into a future built on love. But Ethan hadn't allowed it. He had convinced her, no, pressured her, that I didn't fit the picture of the perfect family he wanted to show. "Mr. Carter's orders," the guard said coldly. "You're not welcome here." The room spun. Guests were clapping as the band struck up a new song. Emily twirling in her white dress, completely unaware that her father was being dragged out like an intruder. "Wait," I croaked, trying to steady my voice. "I'm her father. You can't." Two more guards appeared, closing in like shadows. My pulse hammered. The humiliation burned through me hotter than fire. People were beginning to notice, heads turning, whispers stirring across the ballroom. I saw one of Emily's college friends point in my direction, her eyes widening in shock. And still, Ethan just smiled. That cold, victorious smile. I could have begged. I could have shouted. But something inside me snapped. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and said nothing. If Ethan wanted to make me look powerless, he'd have to do more than summon hired muscle. As they reached for my arms, I whispered under my breath, more to myself than to anyone else. "This isn't over." The doors slammed shut behind me as they pushed me out into the night. The music dulled, replaced by the sting of silence and the hum of city traffic beyond the hotel gates. My daughter was inside, wrapped in celebration, while I stood outside, discarded like trash. But Ethan had made a mistake. He thought he had buried me in humiliation. What he didn't know was that I carried a truth that could tear his carefully polished world apart. And tonight, as I walked away from that glittering ballroom, I swore to myself, before long, everyone in that room would know who Ethan Carter really was. The night air hit me like a slap, cold, sharp, and merciless. I stood on the stone steps of the Grand Regency Hotel in downtown Chicago, the same place where hundreds of strangers were now clinking glasses to celebrate my daughter's wedding without me. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The world blurred under the street lamps, the golden glow bleeding into the wet pavement. I had never felt so powerless in my life. To be shoved aside like I was nothing, like Emily didn't even need me anymore. After everything I had sacrificed for her, it cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. "Sir, you'll need to step further away from the entrance," one of the guards barked from behind me. His voice was flat, professional, but his eyes carried that trace of pity, the kind people give a man they believe has already lost. I walked down the steps slowly, each stride heavy, as if carrying years of disappointment. The city buzzed beyond the hotel gates, car horns blaring, a siren wailing blocks away, neon lights flickering over crowded sidewalks. It was alive, loud, and different, just like Ethan Carter. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers trembling. I thought about calling Emily, but what would I even say? "Sweetheart, I'm outside. They threw me out. Please, come get me." No. She deserved joy on her wedding night. I couldn't put her in the middle, not yet. But then, my thoughts shifted. A memory surfaced, one I had buried because I wanted so badly to believe Ethan could make her happy. 2 weeks earlier, I had stumbled upon something. A folder left unattended in Ethan's home office when I stopped by to drop off a box of Emily's childhood photos. He had excused himself to take a phone call, and in that moment, my eyes had fallen on the open laptop screen. Financial records, wire transfers, names I recognized, names tied to shady deals splashed across the news in recent years. At first, I told myself I had misread it, that I was just a suspicious father struggling to let go. But as I scrolled, one number froze me in place. A six-figure transaction made just days before. It wasn't the money that scared me. It was the recipient, a man notorious for laundering funds through shell companies. When Ethan walked back in, I snapped the laptop shut and forced a smile, pretending nothing had happened. He looked at me oddly, like he suspected I had seen more than I should. And now, seeing the smug grin on his face as I was escorted out, I knew he hadn't just wanted to keep me from Emily's side tonight. He wanted me silent. The truth I carried wasn't just a petty grudge. It was dynamite. And if I used it, Ethan's perfect life, his glittering reputation, the entire empire he was building, it would all come crashing down. But there was one problem. If I exposed him, Emily would be caught in the wreckage. She would learn that the man she married was not just arrogant, but dangerous. I pressed my palm against my chest, my heart thudding like a drum. Could I really let her live a lie just because I was afraid of hurting her? Or was the greater betrayal to say nothing at all? The wedding bells still echoed faintly through the hotel walls. Inside, Emily was dancing. Outside, I stood at a crossroads that would change everything. And as I stared across the Chicago skyline, I realized Ethan Carter had given me no choice. He had drawn the battle line tonight. He thought he had won, but he had just woken a father who had nothing left to lose. I couldn't sleep that night. Back in my modest apartment on the west side of Chicago, the walls felt smaller than ever, closing in around me as I replayed the scene at the hotel over and over. Ethan's smirk, the guard's hands gripping my arms. Emily's radiant smile, untouched by the storm brewing just outside her vision. I sat at the kitchen table with a half-empty pot of coffee, the city's night sounds drifting in through the cracked window, trains rumbling, tires hissing on wet streets, a stray dog barking somewhere in the distance. My phone lay in front of me, dark and silent. I wanted to call Emily, to tell her everything I had seen on Ethan's computer, but the words caught in my throat every time I rehearsed them. How could I ruin her wedding night with accusations that sounded insane without proof? That's when I knew. I couldn't just rely on memory. I needed evidence. Solid, undeniable evidence that Ethan Carter was not the man he pretended to be. The next morning, I pulled out the old spiral notebook I used to keep back when I worked as a building inspector. Years of jotting down numbers, names, little details others overlooked had taught me something important. Truth hides in the smallest cracks. If Ethan was laundering money, there would be a crack somewhere in his glossy surface. I started by digging into public records. Ethan's business, Carter Investments, was polished, sleek, the kind of company reporters loved to write puff pieces about. But hidden beneath the glowing headlines, I found whispers. Subsidiaries that seemed to exist only on paper. Contracts with companies registered in Delaware that shared addresses with half a dozen other suspicious firms. The deeper I dug, the more I saw a pattern. Money flowing in circles, always landing in accounts that tied back to the same shadowy figures. And one name kept surfacing, Raymond Ray Doyle, a man whose reputation in Chicago's underworld was so notorious it made even hardened cops look uneasy. It hit me like a brick. Ethan wasn't just playing with shady deals. He was in business with men who could destroy lives with a single phone call. I leaned back in my chair, the notebook trembling in my hands. Emily had no idea. To her, Ethan was the man who bought her flowers every Friday, who whispered promises of forever, who threw a wedding so extravagant it made the society pages. But behind the tuxedo and the polished grin was a man building his empire on rotten foundations. I thought of Emily as a little girl, her tiny hand clutching mine as we crossed busy intersections. Back then, I swore to her I'd always keep her safe, no matter what. And now, she was in more danger than she could possibly imagine, and the threat was standing right beside her. My phone buzzed suddenly, jolting me from my thoughts. A message. Unknown number. Stay out of Ethan's business. Last warning. My blood ran cold. Someone knew I had been digging. Someone was watching me. I looked toward the window, half expecting a shadow to move in the alley below. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the city. But the message told me everything I needed to know. Ethan wasn't just suspicious of me. He was already taking steps to silence me. And if I didn't act soon, I might not get another chance. I clenched my fists, my resolve hardening like steel. He thought intimidation would stop me? He thought throwing me out of the wedding would break me? No. Ethan Carter had underestimated a father's love. This time, I would be the one to show up uninvited. The following week, I found myself parked 2 blocks away from Ethan and Emily's new home, a sleek, glass-and-steel townhouse in Lincoln Park. It was the kind of place designed to scream wealth and perfection. Polished black doors, spotless white curtains, a luxury car in the driveway. But the shine didn't fool me anymore. I hadn't told Emily I was coming. She wouldn't have let me in, not with Ethan standing guard over her every move. No, this wasn't a visit, it was reconnaissance. I waited until I saw Ethan's black Mercedes pull out of the driveway around noon. He had a habit of leaving for business lunches at that hour. Emily didn't come out with him. The blinds upstairs stayed drawn. Perfect. With my old inspector's toolkit in hand, I walked quickly down the alley until I reached the back entrance. The lock was newer than most, but I still knew the tricks. A steady hand, a small nudge, and within moments, I was inside. The townhouse smelled of expensive candles and fresh paint. Every surface gleamed as though staged for a magazine photo shoot. I moved cautiously, ears tuned to the slightest creak. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure the walls could hear it. Ethan's office was on the 2nd floor. Dark wood desk, frame degrees, a wall of books that looked impressive but untouched. His laptop sat neatly in the center, closed, like a predator waiting to pounce. I pulled out a small flash drive I'd bought the day before and powered the computer on. My hands trembled as I typed quickly, searching for the folder I'd glimpsed weeks earlier. It didn't take long. Ethan wasn't careful. He thought no one would dare cross him. And there it was again. Wire transfers, fake invoices, shell companies. Only this time, I saw something new. A series of payments scheduled for the following month. A massive sum, millions, about to move offshore. The recipient? A corporation linked directly to Ray Doyle. My stomach dropped. Ethan wasn't just playing games with shady money. He was neck-deep in organized crime. Suddenly, footsteps creaked in the hallway. I froze. The doorknob rattled. And then, Dad? My blood turned to ice. Emily stood in the doorway, barefoot, her wedding ring catching the light. Her voice was a mix of shock and hurt. What are you doing here? I shut the laptop in a panic, but it was too late. She had seen enough to know I wasn't just dropping by. I needed to talk to you, I said, forcing my voice steady. Emily, please, you don't know who Ethan really is. Her brow furrowed, confusion flooding her face. What are you talking about? He's my husband. Why are you? She stopped herself, biting her lip. Then, softer, why are you always trying to ruin things? The word stabbed me. Always. She didn't see me as protecting her. She saw me as a problem. But then I noticed something, just for a split second. The flicker of doubt in her eyes. She glanced at the closed laptop, then back at me. You need to go, Dad, before Ethan finds out you were here. I wanted to argue, to beg her to let me show her the files, but the fear in her voice told me enough. She wasn't ready. Not yet. I nodded slowly, stepping past her. One day, I whispered, you'll see the truth. And when you do, I'll be here. Her lips parted, but no words came. She just stood there in the hallway, torn between love and loyalty. As I slipped out of the townhouse, I knew I had ignited a spark. Ethan might have control for now, but doubt had a way of spreading like wildfire. And once it caught, nothing could put it out. Ethan Carter didn't like surprises. That much I'd learned from the first moment I met him. He was the kind of man who rehearsed every smile, curated every gesture, and treated life like a performance he alone directed. So when he came home late that night, his tie loosened and his steps heavier than usual, Emily immediately felt it. Rough day? She asked softly from the kitchen, where she stood rinsing dishes. Her voice carried the warmth of a wife trying to bridge the distance. Ethan forced a grin, dropped his briefcase by the door, and kissed her cheek. But Emily noticed how his eyes flicked quickly toward the office door upstairs. He didn't go straight to dinner. Instead, he climbed the stairs, 2 at a time, and shut the office door behind him. Emily's heart raced. She hadn't told him about her father. She hadn't told him she'd caught me in the office earlier. Every instinct screamed at her to keep that secret buried. She wasn't ready to face the storm it would unleash. Upstairs, Ethan powered on his laptop. Within minutes, his suspicion sharpened into fury. Something felt off. A file had been opened, one he hadn't touched in days. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Someone had been here. Someone had dared to enter his world. And Ethan already knew who. Back in the kitchen, Emily nearly dropped a plate when she heard his voice echo down the staircase. Emily! She hurried up, wiping her hands nervously on a towel. What is it? He studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Did anyone stop by today? Her mouth went dry. No. Why? Because someone's been in my office, he said, his tone casual, but his eyes burning. Laptop was tampered with. Not much, but I noticed these things. Emily forced herself to hold his gaze. Maybe you just forgot, she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. I don't forget. The silence stretched until she could hardly breathe. Finally, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his voice velvet and venom all at once. If you see your father again, Emily, tell him to stay away. For his own good. Her chest tightened. He knew. Somehow he knew. That night, as Ethan slept soundly beside her, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling. She wanted to believe her father was wrong, that Ethan was just protective, maybe even controlling, but not dangerous. Yet something about the way Ethan had spoken chilled her to the bone. Meanwhile, across the city, I sat in my dimly lit apartment, staring at the printed copies of Ethan's financial files spread across my table. I had managed to transfer everything onto my drive before Emily caught me, and now the evidence sat in front of me, undeniable and damning. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion pulling at me. Every instinct screamed to go public, to take this to the authorities. But I knew men like Ethan. With his connections, his wealth, his polished reputation, lawyers would spin, politicians would shield, and somehow he'd walk away untouchable. No, if I wanted to save Emily, I had to play this carefully. I had to wait for the moment when Ethan's mask cracked, when his empire was most vulnerable. And judging by the rage I had glimpsed in his eyes that night, that moment was coming faster than even he realized. It happened 2 nights later. I was walking home from the corner grocery store, a paper bag of bread and milk tucked under my arm, when I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Chicago streets were never empty, not even this late. But then the steps grew closer, too close. Evening, old man. A voice slid out of the shadows. 2 figures stepped into the glow of the street lamp ahead. Both wore dark jackets, hands buried in their pockets. Their faces were half hidden, but the smirk on one of them told me exactly who had sent them. I tightened my grip on the grocery bag. Can I help you? The taller one chuckled. Yeah, you can stop snooping where you don't belong. Before I could answer, the shorter one stepped forward and shoved me hard against the brick wall. The bag ripped, bread scattering into the gutter. My shoulder slammed into cold stone, pain shooting down my arm. This is your warning, the taller one hissed. Mister, Carter doesn't appreciate nosy father-in-laws digging through his files. My chest tightened. They weren't even pretending anymore. Ethan wasn't hiding behind lawyers or polite smiles. He was sending thugs straight to my doorstep. I spat blood onto the sidewalk and forced a grim smile. Tell Ethan, if he thinks a couple of punks will scare me off, he doesn't know me very well. The shorter one cocked his fist, but the taller man held him back. Not tonight. Just the message. They turned and melted back into the alley, leaving me bruised, bleeding, and more determined than ever. I staggered home, each step fueled not by fear, but by fire. He wanted me silent. He wanted me invisible. But he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat alone in her bedroom. Ethan was still at the office, or so he claimed. She stared at the ceiling, her mind a storm. Her father's words replayed in her head. One day, you'll see the truth. She had dismissed them at first, but now she couldn't. Earlier that evening, she had gone to grab a jacket from Ethan's closet. That's when she noticed it, an envelope tucked behind a row of pressed shirts. She pulled it out, heart racing. Inside were stacks of $100 bills. Dozens of them. When Ethan came home, she didn't mention it. She just smiled, pretended to be tired, and kissed him goodnight. But as she lay awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, doubt gnawed at her. Why would Ethan keep that much cash hidden? Why did his temper flare every time her father's name came up? For the first time, Emily felt fear. Not of losing Ethan, but of never really knowing who he was. And yet, what terrified her most wasn't Ethan's secrets. It was the thought that her father had been right all along. The bruises on my ribs ached with every breath. I moved slowly around my apartment, a bottle of aspirin on the table, the shattered remains of the grocery bag still lying in the trash as a reminder. Ethan's men had done their job, except instead of frightening me into silence, they'd given me the final push I needed. I sat at my desk, the evidence I'd copied from his laptop spread out before me. Spreadsheets, shell companies, bank transfers that painted a picture of a man climbing a ladder built on crime. I circled names, drew arrows, and filled pages of my old inspector's notebook with notes. The more I worked, the clearer it became. Ethan Carter wasn't just laundering money. He was partnering with people capable of violence far worse than a street beating. The thought of Emily trapped in that world filled me with cold rage. She was my little girl, the one I used to read bedtime stories to, the one who once swore she'd never marry anyone who couldn't make me smile. And now she was married to a man who wanted me destroyed. I stared out the window at the flickering city lights. If the system couldn't touch Ethan, then maybe it was up to me. But how far was I willing to go? Emily, meanwhile, was starting her own quiet investigation. The envelope of cash still haunted her. She couldn't shake the image of her father's desperate eyes in the hallway when he said, "One day, you'll see the truth." She needed answers. The next morning, while Ethan was in the shower, Emily slipped into his office. Her hands trembled as she powered on the laptop. The screen glowed to life, and for a moment, her heart nearly stopped. There was no password prompt. Ethan must have trusted no one in the house would dare look. She clicked through folders, each more confusing than the last. Contracts, invoices, files marked with vague names like consulting or logistics. But then she found a folder simply titled Doyle. She opened it, and her blood ran cold. Dozens of documents, signed agreements, scanned IDs, financial transfers, each one linking Ethan directly to Raymond Doyle. The name rang in her ears. She remembered hearing it whispered once at a dinner party, a name that made even wealthy guests shift uncomfortably. Her chest tightened. She closed the laptop quickly, erasing her tracks. But as she stepped out of the office, she nearly collided with Ethan. "Looking for something?" he asked smoothly, towel draped over his shoulders, droplets of water still running down his arms. His eyes narrowed, just for a second. Emily forced a smile. "Just thought I left my phone in here." Ethan studied her face, then leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Be careful, sweetheart. Curiosity is a dangerous thing." She nodded, her heart pounding. For the rest of the day, she couldn't shake the feeling that he already knew what she'd seen. That night, as the city lights shimmered outside my window, I made a silent vow. If Ethan thought he could intimidate me into silence, he was wrong. I would expose him. And if it meant risking everything, my safety, my freedom, even my life, so be it. Because Emily was worth it. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was another anonymous threat, another reminder from Ethan's men that I was supposed to stay in my place. But when I picked it up, the name on the screen made my breath catch. Emily. For a moment, I just stared, unsure if my eyes were deceiving me. She hadn't called me since the wedding. Not once. Not after I was thrown out. Not even after I'd left her messages, she never returned. And now here she was. I answered on the first ring. "Emily." My voice cracked with equal parts relief and fear. There was silence for a beat. Then her whisper, "Dad. I can't talk long. He's asleep." I sat upright, heart pounding. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" "No," she said quickly, though her voice trembled. "Not yet. But you were right. About Ethan." The words hit me like a wave. "Emily. I found things," she cut in, her tone hushed and urgent. "Files. Money. His connection to some man named Doyle." I closed my eyes, pain and pride colliding in my chest. She had seen it for herself. The truth I'd been carrying alone was no longer mine to bear. "You have to leave him," I said firmly. "Tonight. Come here, I can't," she whispered sharply. "It's not that simple. He watches everything. And if he finds out I called you..." Her voice cracked. Breaking into a sob she tried to muffle. "Dad, I don't know what to do." Hearing her cry shattered me. I wanted nothing more than to storm into that house, drag her away, and never look back. But Ethan wasn't just a controlling husband. He was dangerous. The men he worked with wouldn't think twice about silencing anyone who got in their way, even her. "Listen to me." I said gently, fighting to keep my voice steady. You're not alone. I'm going to fix this. But you need to be careful. Don't let him know you know. Pretend everything's normal. Can you do that for me? She sniffled. Yes. I swear, Emily, I said, gripping the phone like it was her hand. I'll take him down. For you. For us. A click on the other end made my stomach drop. Not the sound of her hanging up, something else. Like another line joining the call. Emily, I whispered. I have to go, she breathed quickly. Then the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, my pulse racing. Had Ethan overheard? Had one of his men tapped her phone? The danger was no longer creeping closer. It was already inside her home. I leaned back in the chair, fists clenched, jaw tight. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, each second reminding me that Emily was still under Ethan's roof, still pretending, still trapped. And as much as I wanted to believe I could outsmart him with notebooks and evidence, I realized the truth. Ethan Carter wasn't just a businessman gone rotten. He was a predator. And predators didn't stop until they were caged or killed. The next morning, Ethan Carter noticed it. Emily poured coffee into his favorite mug, her smile as bright as ever, but her hands shook just slightly. She placed the cup in front of him, and though she tried to look away quickly, Ethan caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as steam curled from the coffee. You didn't sleep much, he said casually. Emily forced a laugh. Too much caffeine yesterday, I guess. Ethan took a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. He didn't need her to confess. He had built his empire on reading people, on spotting weakness. And Emily's mask, once flawless, had begun to crack. Sweetheart, he said smoothly, reaching across the table to brush her hand. You know you can tell me anything, right? Her pulse jumped beneath his touch. Of course. But Ethan heard the lie in her voice. And lies always demanded correction. Across the city, I was hunched over my desk, piecing together the puzzle. The files I'd copied were damning, yes, but they weren't enough on their own. I needed leverage. Something bigger. Something that would make Ethan crumble under his own weight. That's when I thought of Doyle. Men like Doyle didn't like loose ends. If Ethan was moving millions through his channels, then Doyle had just as much to lose if anything went wrong. Maybe, just maybe, Doyle could be turned against him. But reaching a man like that wasn't simple. One wrong step, and I'd end up face down in the Chicago River. Still, the risk was worth it. I'd spent years teaching Emily never to back down from a bully. How could I do any less now? I scribbled an address in my notebook, an old warehouse on the south side rumored to be one of Doyle's meeting spots. It was reckless, maybe even suicidal, but I didn't care. If Ethan wanted to play with wolves, then I dragged the biggest one into the light. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. He found Emily in the living room, curled up with a book she wasn't really reading. He dropped his briefcase, loosened his tie, and sat beside her on the couch. You've been quiet lately, he said softly. Something bothering you? Emily forced a smile. Just tired, that's all. He studied her for a long moment, then brushed his hand down her hair, his voice low, almost tender. You're not still thinking about your father, are you? Her stomach nodded. No. Why would I? Because he's poison, Ethan said, his tone hardening. He wants to ruin what we have. Don't let him. Emily nodded quickly, but her heart pounded. She knew better now. She had seen the files, the cash, the shadows her husband kept tucked neatly behind polished smiles. And she couldn't stop wondering if Ethan already knew about her late-night call. As he pulled her into his arms, she closed her eyes and prayed he couldn't feel the truth hammering in her chest. Meanwhile, I zipped up my jacket and stepped into the bitter wind off Lake Michigan. The city lights glowed on the horizon, and in the distance, freight trains groaned along the tracks. I was heading into enemy territory with nothing but a notebook and a father's determination. And deep down, I knew, if this meeting with Doyle went wrong, Emily might lose me forever. But if it went right, Ethan Carter's empire would burn. The warehouse looked abandoned from the outside. Broken windows, rusted doors, graffiti covering every inch of brick. But the two black SUVs parked at the curb told a different story. I tightened my grip on the notebook in my pocket as I stepped closer. The bitter wind off Lake Michigan carried the stench of oil and damp concrete. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I forced myself forward. Emily's face, scared, trapped, was all the courage I needed. At the entrance, a man stepped out of the shadows. Stocky, bald, leather jacket zipped to his chin. His hand rested casually on the pistol at his hip. "You lost, old man," he growled. "I'm here to see Doyle," I said firmly. He eyed me up and down, then smirked. Not many people ask for that meeting. Minutes later, I was led inside. The warehouse was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb that swung slightly with each draft. At a table in the center sat Raymond Doyle himself, thick build, salt and pepper beard, eyes like ice. He didn't rise when I approached. "So," he rumbled, leaning back in his chair, "you're the father-in-law." My chest tightened. He already knew who I was. "I'm here because your partner, Ethan Carter, is planning to double-cross you," I said, wasting no time. "I've seen the files. Offshore transfers. Accounts in his name, not yours. He's moving money that doesn't have your cut attached." For a moment, silence filled the warehouse. Then Doyle laughed, a low, gravelly sound that echoed off the walls. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, leaning forward. "But guts don't mean you're telling the truth." I pulled the copies of Ethan's financial records from my jacket and slid them across the table. Doyle's men tensed instantly, but Doyle waved them back. He thumbed through the papers, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. When he finally looked up, his eyes burned like steel. "If you're lying, old man, I'll put you in the ground myself." "I'm not lying," I said steadily. "I don't care about your business. All I care about is my daughter. Ethan is dangerous, and he's dragging her down with him. If you want to deal with him, fine, but don't let her be collateral damage." Doyle tapped the stack of papers with one thick finger, his expression unreadable. "You come into my house, accuse my partner, and hand me his secrets. Brave or stupid? Maybe both." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Get out of here before I change my mind. I'll decide what happens to Carter." The guards stepped in immediately, escorting me back into the night. My pulse hammered, every step away from that warehouse heavier than the last. I had planted the seed, but seeds could grow into anything. Had I just signed Ethan's death warrant? Or my own? Back at the townhouse, Emily sat at the vanity, brushing her hair with trembling hands. Ethan was in the shower, humming casually, as though nothing in the world could touch him. On the counter beside her lay the envelope of cash she had pulled out again. She stared at it, her reflection pale in the mirror. Her father's warning echoed in her mind, louder now than ever. She opened her phone, scrolling to his number. Her thumb hovered over the call button, heart racing. But before she could press it, the bathroom door opened. Ethan emerged, towel slung low, steam swirling around him. Her screen went dark. "Everything okay?" he asked, watching her closely. Emily forced a smile, hiding the phone under the vanity. Of course. But inside, the doubt was no longer just a flicker. It was spreading, fast, like fire through dry grass. Ethan Carter prided himself on control. Every meeting, every deal, every conversation was scripted in his head long before it happened. That's why the phone call rattled him so badly. It came late the next afternoon. He was in his office, reviewing a set of contracts, when the screen lit up with a name that made his blood run cold. "Ray Doyle." He answered quickly, forcing his usual charm into his tone. "Ray, I was just about to call you." The voice on the other end was low and sharp. "Cut the act, Carter. We need to talk." Ethan swallowed hard. Doyle never called unless something was wrong, and his tone left no room for pleasantries. "What's the problem?" Ethan asked carefully. "The problem," Doyle growled, "is that I've got paperwork showing you've been moving money behind my back. Big money. Offshore. Care to explain that?" Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. His mind raced. He'd been meticulous, too meticulous for Doyle to have found out on his own. That meant only one thing. The father. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan said smoothly, trying to regain his footing. "Someone's feeding you lies. I'd never cross you, Ray." "Maybe," Doyle replied. "Or maybe you've gotten sloppy. Either way, I'll be watching. One wrong move, Carter, and it won't be lawyers coming after you. It'll be me." The line went dead. Ethan slammed the phone onto the desk, his pulse pounding. Rage burned through him like wildfire. The old man had gone too far. He wasn't just snooping anymore. He was turning allies into enemies. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the ground shift under his feet, and he didn't like it. Meanwhile, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her phone. She had overheard Ethan's half of the call, the tension in his voice impossible to miss. She didn't catch every word, but she heard enough to know something was unraveling. When Ethan stormed downstairs minutes later, she quickly slid the envelope of cash back under the vanity and pretended to be folding laundry. "You seen your father lately?" Ethan asked suddenly, his eyes piercing. Emily froze. "No." "Why?" His lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Because he's about to make a mistake he won't walk away from. And I don't want you caught in the middle." Her chest tightened, but she kept her face calm. "I told you, I'm done with him." Ethan studied her a moment longer, then kissed her forehead and walked out. The sound of the front door slamming shook the walls. Emily dropped the laundry and sat on the floor, trembling. Every instinct screamed that her father was in danger. And yet, she couldn't tell Ethan she had called him. If he knew, she wasn't sure what he'd do. That night, I sat alone at my desk, staring at the phone. My gamble with Doyle had worked. Ethan was rattled. But it also meant I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I thought about Emily, trapped in that house with a man whose empire was crumbling and whose temper was growing sharper by the hour. I whispered into the silence of my apartment, "Hold on, Emily. Just a little longer. I'm coming for you." But I knew the clock was ticking. Ethan wasn't the type to lick his wounds. He'd strike back. And when he did, it would be brutal. The knock came just after midnight. I was sitting at my desk, half dozing over the scattered files, when the sharp rap on the door jolted me awake. My chest tightened. Nobody decent knocked at that hour. I reached for the baseball bat I kept propped against the wall and approached quietly. Another knock, louder, harder this time. "Open up, old man." The voice was low, familiar. My gut clenched. Ethan had sent them again. I didn't move. The hallway outside creaked under shifting weight. Then, silence, until the sound of metal scraping at the lock filled the air. They weren't waiting for permission this time. I gripped the bat tighter, sweat beading on my forehead. The lock clicked, the door creaked open, and two figures slipped inside. The first one didn't even see it coming. I swung with everything I had, the bat connecting with his forearm. He cursed, dropping the crowbar he'd been holding. The second lunged, but I shoved the door hard, pinning him halfway. We struggled, fists flying, until finally I managed to push them both back into the hall. "You tell Carter," I growled, breathing hard. "If he wants me gone, he'll have to face me himself." The one with the crowbar clutched his arm, glaring. "This isn't over." Their footsteps thundered down the stairwell, fading into the night. I slammed the door shut, my chest heaving. My apartment felt smaller than ever, its shadows closing in. This was no longer about warnings, it was war. At the townhouse, Emily lay in bed, restless. Ethan had been pacing for hours, muttering about betrayal, about teaching lessons. When he finally fell asleep, she slipped quietly into the bathroom and shut the door. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling. Her father's number stared back at her. She hesitated, afraid Ethan might somehow hear even through walls. Instead of calling, she typed a message. "Be careful. He's angry. He's sending people after you. Please don't give him a reason to hurt you." She pressed send, deleted the conversation, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She barely recognized herself anymore. When she returned to bed, Ethan shifted in his sleep, one arm draping over her. She froze, every nerve in her body screaming to move, to run, but she stayed still, trapped beneath the weight of his presence. My phone buzzed with Emily's message as I sat at the kitchen table, still gripping the bat. Her words sank deep. "He's sending people after you." I'd already felt their fists, their crowbars, their threats. But seeing Emily's fear written out in trembling letters broke me in a way bruises couldn't. She was still inside with him, still under his roof, still pretending. And if Ethan was lashing out at me, it was only a matter of time before he turned his anger on her. I stared at the pile of evidence one last time, then closed the folder. Enough waiting. Enough planning. It was time to end this. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Ethan Carter no longer strutted with the same polished confidence. His temper flared at the smallest inconvenience, a late phone call, a misplaced document, even the way Emily folded laundry. He snapped at employees on the phone, slammed doors, and paced the townhouse like a caged animal. Emily noticed every crack. She'd seen Ethan angry before, but this was different. This wasn't the irritation of a proud man. This was fear. Something, or someone, had shaken him to his core, and she knew exactly who. Late one night, while Ethan worked in his office, Emily slipped into the garage. Her hands shook as she opened the trunk of her car and quietly packed a bag, a few clothes, her passport, the small jewelry box her mother had left her. She slid it under the floorboard of the trunk, covering it with an old blanket. Her plan was simple: wait for the right moment, then drive straight to her father's apartment. But she also knew Ethan's eyes were everywhere. If he even suspected she was preparing to leave, the consequences would be catastrophic. When she returned to the house, Ethan was standing in the kitchen, staring at her. "Out late?" he asked smoothly. Emily's breath caught. "Just grabbing something from the car?" His eyes narrowed. For a moment, she thought he would press, but then he only smiled. That smile chilled her more than his anger ever could. Meanwhile, across town, I was preparing too. I had patched myself up from the last attack, but the bruises only strengthened my resolve. Ethan thought intimidation would break me, but it had done the opposite. It had lit a fire I couldn't put out. I gathered every piece of evidence I had, files, copies, notes, and slipped them into a worn leather briefcase. Then I pulled my old service revolver from the closet. I hadn't touched it in years, not since retiring it after my brother convinced me it was safer locked away. But tonight, safety was no longer an option. I sat at the table, running my thumb along the cold steel, thinking of Emily. She had always been the one light in my life after her mother passed. Every decision I'd made since had been for her. And now, standing against Ethan wasn't just about saving her marriage. It was about keeping that light alive. My phone buzzed. Another message from Emily. "He's watching me closer. I don't know how long I can keep pretending." My jaw tightened. She was breaking under the pressure. If I didn't act soon, Ethan would either consume her or destroy her. I stood, holstered the revolver, and zipped the briefcase. It was time. Ethan, on the other hand, was spiraling. The phone call from Doyle still echoed in his mind, gnawing at his confidence. The old man had poisoned the well, and now Doyle's trust, the very foundation of Ethan's empire, was slipping. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. His reflection in the glass looked different somehow, less like the untouchable tycoon he had built himself into, and more like a man standing on quicksand. And that's when he made his decision. If the old man wanted war, then war was what he would get. Emily's hands shook as she gripped the car keys. The night was quiet, the townhouse dark, Ethan finally asleep upstairs. She'd waited days for this moment, rehearsing every step in her mind. Her heart pounded as she crept into the garage, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The soft hum of the engine filled her ears like a war drum. She reached for the gear shift. "Going somewhere?" The voice froze her blood. Ethan stood in the doorway, half hidden in shadow, arms folded across his chest. He wasn't dressed for bed. He was fully clothed, jacket on, as if he'd been waiting for her. Emily's breath hitched. I was just. Save it," Ethan snapped, stepping closer. His eyes glinted like steel. "I warned you about your father. You think I don't see what you're doing? The lies? The sneaking around?" Her grip tightened on the wheel. "You're paranoid." "Am I?" He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Because I know he's been meeting with Doyle. I know he's feeding poison into my business. And now," his voice dropped to a whisper, "now I know you've chosen his side." Tears stung her eyes. "Ethan, please. I just want." "What you want doesn't matter," he hissed. "You're mine now, and no one, not even your father, can take you away from me." At that very moment, I was walking up the dimly lit street toward the townhouse. The briefcase of evidence swung heavy at my side, the revolver pressing cold against my ribs. Every step echoed with purpose. I didn't care if Ethan had guards, or money, or Doyle's entire army behind him. Tonight wasn't about evidence anymore. Tonight was about my daughter. When I reached the driveway, I saw the garage light glowing faintly under the door. My gut told me something was wrong. I hurried forward, my hand brushing the revolver's grip. Through the small window, I saw Emily in the driver's seat, frozen, and Ethan looming over her. His hand slammed against the car hood, his face twisted with rage. That was all it took. I yanked the side door open, the briefcase dropping to the floor with a heavy thud. "Step away from her, Ethan," I barked, the revolver steady in my hand. Emily gasped. Ethan turned slowly, that smug smile curling across his lips even now. "Well," he drawled, "look who decided to show up." The pathetic old man who can't take a hint. Get away from my daughter, I growled. He laughed, an ugly, hollow sound. You think you scare me? You're nothing. Always have been. Always will be. Emily's eyes darted between us, tears streaming down her face. Dad, please. But Ethan didn't back down. He stepped forward, each stride deliberate, daring me to pull the trigger. This is my house, he said coldly. My wife. My life. And you. He jabbed a finger at me. You're done. The air crackled with tension, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. My finger tightened on the trigger, and for the first time in years, Ethan Carter's mask slipped. His polished smile faltered, revealing the raw fury and fear beneath. For a moment, time froze in the garage. The hum of the car engine vibrated through the air, mixing with the ragged sound of Emily's breath. Ethan stood tall, daring me to shoot, while my finger tightened on the trigger. But I didn't come here to kill him. I came here to end him. With my free hand, I kicked the briefcase forward. It slid across the concrete, stopping at Ethan's feet. He glanced down, confused. Open it, I said, my voice steady. He sneered. What is this, some pathetic stunt? Open it, I repeated, louder this time. Reluctantly, he crouched and flipped the latches. The lid fell back, and his smirk vanished. Inside lay every document I had gathered. Bank transfers, contracts, files linking him directly to Raymond Doyle. The very evidence that had already made Doyle suspicious of him. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ethan, what is this? He slammed the case shut, rage blazing in his eyes. Lies. All of it. Your father is desperate, trying to turn you against me. But Emily shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. No. I saw them too. The files on your computer. The money. The names. Her voice cracked. It's true, isn't it? For the first time, Ethan faltered. His jaw clenched, but no denial came. I lowered the revolver slightly, my voice calm but cutting. You think you're untouchable, Ethan. But I gave copies of this evidence to people who don't owe you loyalty. By now, Doyle knows you've been skimming. And the authorities? They'll know soon enough. His face paled, his polished armor crumbling. You don't know what you've done. Oh, I know exactly, I said. You tried to tear me out of my daughter's life. You tried to bury me. But tonight, it's you who's finished. Emily stepped out of the car, her voice trembling but firm. We're done, Ethan. I don't care about your money, your power, any of it. I will never live under your lies again. Her words cut deeper than any bullet. Ethan staggered back, eyes wild, fury and desperation colliding. For a second, I thought he might lunge, but instead, he let out a bitter laugh. You think this ends me? Men like me don't fall, Emily. Men like me. The roar of an engine outside drowned him out. Headlights sliced across the garage as a black SUV rolled to a stop. Two men stepped out, their faces grim. Doyle's men. Ethan froze. Emily grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. Dad. I pulled her close, shielding her as the men advanced. They didn't look at us. Their eyes were locked on Ethan. Mr. Doyle wants a word, one of them said coldly. Ethan's mask shattered. His face twisted with panic as they grabbed his arms, dragging him toward the SUV. He screamed, cursed, fought, but it was useless. And then he was gone. Silence filled the garage, broken only by Emily's quiet sobs. She clung to me, her body shaking. I'm so sorry, Dad, she whispered. I should have listened sooner. I held her tight, pressing my cheek against her hair. You're safe now. That's all that matters. Outside, the city buzzed as if nothing had happened, its lights indifferent to the battle we'd just survived. But for us, for me and Emily, everything had changed. We walked out of that garage together, leaving behind the wreckage of Ethan Carter's lies. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I knew one thing for certain. No matter how dark the world became, I would always fight to keep my daughter in the light.